Roundtable discussion held in the framework of the 13th edition of the Malta Mediterranean Literature Festival, entitled Writing Fragile, Literature and Mental Health. On behalf of the team of the festival, I would like to thank and welcome Glen Calleja, who will be moderating the debate, and our speakers, authors Clare Azzopardi from Malta, Laia López Manrique from Spain, Massimo Barilla from Italy, Juana Adock from Mexico, UK, and Jean-Rémi Gandon from France. It is an honor to have you all with us here tonight. Thank you for coming. And now I invite Glen to take the floor.
This evening, we're going to have a bit of a discussion between us, hear views and different perspectives and approaches vis-a-vis literature and mental health. I'll also be inviting the panelists to present some of their works, because ultimately they're practitioners, so they're poets and writers. So that component is going to be important as well. And obviously I'm going to invite you to give your own perspectives when you feel you need to make a point. We'll leave the discussion to the floor till the end. So first let's hear the panelists say what they need to say. And then we open it to you. Writing fragile to me, so this evening's discussion to me has two important pillars. The first one is the practice of writing itself, and that is why on the panel we have a list of writers rather than medical professionals, medical specialists, or patients, for that matter. So primarily our panel is about writing, the practice of writing. The other part is more about fragility, whatever that might be, than about mental illness in general, okay? And fragility to me is a very, very interesting concept. Fragility doesn't mean something which is incomplete. Fragility is a state of being where there's the potential of being broken. The potential of being broken is on the one hand, or at least to me, is on the one hand a state of vulnerability. On the other hand, it's also the potential to break out of habit, break out of the current mode, break out of the current state of being. So it's a state of being which helps you move forward. So there's a certain power in fragility, there's a certain power in acknowledging that state of being and acknowledging that dimension of who we are. And this is the first, let's say, thought or application I'd like to propose to the panelists. For the panelists, we're going to keep it very short, okay? We're going to keep it very, very short and concise. So yeah, this is the starting point I'd like to kick off the discussion with. What's fragility to you? And if you differentiate between fragility and vulnerability, let's start with that, shall we? Okay, anyone wants to start, or shall we go with Liana? Go. Hi. Sorry.
No, it's nice to meet you.
I just broke your name.
I totally agree with you in the way that fragility can be a potential power in writing and in living. For me, after thinking about this and thinking about the practice of writing, I think fragility is the first condition of starting writing work. It's putting you in a side where you can receive, where you're receptive, and you're broken. You can break, as you said. It's vulnerability. It's similar, but for me, it's not the same. It's not the same. Like I can be vulnerable, but I have some power with it to transform that.
That's from the position of a writer.
Yes,
of
that's the position of a writer. And
that's at the beginning of the writing process.
Yes, to me it's the beginning of the writing process. As long as it always implicates a state of you confront to something that's unknown, always. There is a book of Marie Duras, the French novelist, that exactly said that. When she started to write, she was forced to confront what she didn't know, and things came to her. Things came to her later.
Yeah, about this process, we'll speak a bit later. Let's hear what Claire has to say.
So for me, fragility is suffering and pain, and it's also it's also what attracts me in my writing, because I think it helps me to come face to face with the human condition.
Okay, so you're saying there's the seduction of suffering and pain which leads you to the process of writing. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
I wouldn't want to write about happiness, or I think it would be boring. And the state of being happy, although in general there is a lot of literature which doesn't deal with suffering and fragility. But as you said as well, I think the human being is a sum of many broken parts. You know? And then we can break and we can reassemble ourselves again, and in this process we can renew ourselves, as you said, or start from scratch, be different, grow. But maybe not everyone can reassemble these parts. And
the pleasure you're mentioning is somewhat of a masochistic sort of. You walk into the process of writing to suffer. It's quite an indulgence.
yes, but why would I want to write from my comfort zone? Why would I want to write from my comfort zone? I want to write about the other, so the fragile is usually the marginalized.
It's quite an assumption to assume that writing about happiness is writing from the comfort zone. Actually, in everyday life, we struggle more to be happy than to
But I'm speaking on my behalf.
Yes, of course.
I think if I had to write about my happy life, I would be very boring for everyone. Nobody would want to read it. So
Juana, thank you.
Well, about happiness and sadness, it's like the opening of Anna Karenina, right? Happy families are equal, but unhappy families are unique, and they're unhappy in their own unique way, and that's where we find the interest. That's where we find the kind of juice of the gold. And
fragility?
Yeah, that reminds me of fragility. So there's a famous Leonard Cohen quote, "There's a crack in everything, and that's where the light gets in." And it also makes me think of the art of kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing pottery with gold, and how, that those cracks where the light comes in and where the gold is actually what makes us beautiful and what makes us unique, the way we have reassembled ourselves. And in a way, our humanity is there. You were asking about the human potential to break, and what is a human if they cannot break, right?
I never mentioned and this is interesting. I never mentioned reassembling oneself or healing, and it's sort of
We
that's the
simply want to
direction
go there.
three of you are taking,
Yeah, that's true.
which is an interesting assumption that we're breaking, but with the hope of some kind of renewal or some kind of healing, some kind of.
Well, I mean, we might break and kind of stay solidified in that broken shape, and maybe that isn't necessarily a positive one, but that is the reality of what we have become, our experiences. Yeah, I don't know if the healing part is the assumption there, but.
This evening with us we have also Adrian and Nadia, who are supporting the interpretation or the translation of some of the work we'll be, or some of the views we'll be hearing. So now we're going to skip Adrian.
Io mi riferirò più all'esperienza teatrale che all'esperienza della scrittura, però in realtà sono collegate, perché in realtà l'attore in scena crea come crea in qualche modo l'autore, lo scrittore.
I need to change my pen.
It's okay.
So I'll be talking more about theater than about writing, than about other forms of writing, but in reality these are closely linked.
Io dico sempre, teatro quell'attore che cammina sul filo, che può cadere. Un attore che non mette in conto di poter cadere è destinato a essere un pessimo attore.
So I always say that sort of blessed is the writer who walks on a tightrope, who always risks falling. Somebody who doesn't take that risk is not a great writer.
Quindi per me la fragilità è questo, è una condizione potenziale ricchissima, che è questo equilibrio che consente una verità.
So fragility is a very rich potential condition, and it's an equilibrium that offers many possibilities.
Invece la vulnerabilità è qualcosa di molto meno interessante.
Vulnerability to me is much less interesting.
Ci sono registi che si approcciano all'attore più come quasi guru, che vanno a cercare la vulnerabilità, ma questo secondo me non serve a niente, né all'attore né al regista.
There are directors who look at actors as gurus.
Director.
Okay. There are actors that look at.
Che si pongono come guru rispetto all'attore.
Okay. So there are directors who present themselves to their actors as if they were gurus, and this is definitely not a positive approach. This is not a helpful approach.
Dunque, insomma, sembra un concetto simile, ma in realtà sono aspetti completamente diversi della fragilità. La stessa cosa si può riportare ovviamente in una maniera diversa sulla scrittura. Chi si approccia a scrivere deve mettere in conto il fallimento.
So they seem very similar concepts, but in reality they're quite different. Whoever decides to write has to face the possibility of failing.
Okay, let's get Jean. Fragility, Jean.
Yeah, fragility. Fragility, yes. And we are in our world, everything moves. Dans notre monde, tout, je vais le faire en français, Nadia va traduire, ce sera plus simple, excusez-moi. Dans notre monde, tout bouge. Nous sommes mis systématiquement en situation de fragilité. Il y a aussi la violence des humains contre les humains, et il y a la souffrance de ce que nous pouvons endurer, la mort d'un enfant ou la maladie ou d'autres choses.
So he's saying in our world everything is in constant movement, and we are systematically confronted with this idea of fragility. There are different forms of violence of humans against humans. For example, the passing away of a child, or being confronted with an illness.
Et peut-être que, comme tout bouge dans ce monde, nous nous agitons beaucoup. Et il faudrait peut-être arriver à cette agitation à substituer du tremblement.
So he said, since everything is moving, we are in a kind of agitation. And maybe what we need to do is move from this agitation to a state of trembling.
Jean-Luc Godard, le cinéaste, dit à un moment, une citation que j'aime beaucoup, on parle souvent de la violence des rues, mais qu'en est-il de la violence des berges?
So Jean-Luc Godard, who is a filmmaker, is known for this sentence of his which states, we speak very often about the violence of a river overflowing, but what about the violence on the banks of the river?
Est-ce qu'il nous sera possible à un moment d'arrêter de croire et à la place de rêver?
So is it possible for us to stop believing and start dreaming instead?
So, just a second there. As a writer, as a poet, no, Jean?
Yeah.
When you approach your writing, when you start the process, do you feel, and now we're moving to the second part of taking risks and so on, do you feel like you have something to say, or are you going to your writing process, are you going to your writing looking for for something, for meaning perhaps, for suffering, whatever that dimension might look like in that case, in that context, in that moment?
J'essaie d'accueillir ce qui tremble dans la nuit. Quand j'écris, c'est un moment où les mots me débordent. Les mots me débordent comme une crue.
So he says, I try to welcome whatever trembles in the night, during the night. So he says it's like when he's writing, it's a form of overflow. It's like when words suddenly overflow. An overflow of words.
Okay, I'd like to ask the other panelists. So this is the question about authority on one hand and humility on the other hand. So the author might feel that they have something to say, that they have something they need to verbalize, so something which isn't necessarily already very clear, but they're sitting down to verbalize it, to write it down for themselves first, and then for an audience. What does the writing process mean to you in this respect? Do you sit down and verbalize, or do you sit down and look for imagery, look for narratives even? How do you work in this respect? We can move erratically if you like.
Well, for me, it's writing is often a kind of process of trying to understand or come to grips with very complex things. It could be how I'm feeling about some piece of news that I read, or it could be any kind of different experience that might be quite difficult to articulate. And in writing, I feel like I'm able to see all the elements that are at play, all the kind of different moving parts and how they might interact. But it also...
How do you process? How do you approach that? Do you first write notes? Do you go for full phrases and sentences? How do you approach it?
full phrases and sentences. It's often writing by hand in my notebook and just kind of allowing the understanding to arrive almost on its own. Somebody was talking earlier about writing. The writing itself is writing itself. You know, the writing itself. So I really like that idea, and kind of it almost involves a process of me getting out of the way of the words and just allowing the words to come forward.
So that puts you in the position of someone looking for, someone trying to verbalize rather than stating one's own point of view or stating one's own narratives which have already been constructed and imagery which has already, you know, found its clarity in your head, as it were. Both positions to me are privileges. I mean, the privilege of a writer to be able to say what he or she wants to say, and the privilege to be able to sit down and, using techniques and devices, look for those words, look for that imagery, look for those pleasures of suffering, if you like, or happiness. Claire, you?
Yes, I think we are privileged, and I would like to mention a short story here. A couple of years ago, Goitom Youssef, who is an immigrant from Eritrea, came up to me to tell me to write his story. And of course, at first I was shocked because this is the other that I don't know.
The other what?
The other that I don't know. This is not my comfort zone. I haven't escaped from the army. I haven't walked through the desert for a year. I haven't worked in camps in Libya. To get enough money to get the boat, and well, we all know the story. We all know the story. We've heard it so many times, but still, when I told him why don't you write it, he said, because I want my story to be heard, and I want my story to be read, and I want it to be read by children. And you are the person that the children know. So in that sense, I am the witness. I'm bearing witness of this story, and I have the privilege of writing it as well, so that everyone writes it everyone reads it because they know me. They have read already some of my books, and he, Goitom, wants his story to be read, because he said, if I write it, nobody will read it.
In vis-a-vis reporting other stories or writing other stories or verbalizing other stories, new responsibilities obviously come in. There's the danger, for example, with migration stories, of perpetuating old stories,
and of victimizing. And this is what we don't want to do.
Perpetuating even blame and guilt and that all.
But this is the difference than from a reportage or the news.
Yes, of course, but there's
and literature. No?
If it's rooted in biographical facts, there's an element of reportage as well.
It's true.
And you have to ground it.
But imagery, I think, would elevate the imagery and rhythm and all these figures of speech that would make
this whole discussion about telling other people's stories is interesting when it comes to mental health, because we haven't really jumped into the topic yet. In the relationship between the medical professional and patients, of course. When a patient reports to the medical professional, or when a patient reports to friends, family, and so on about what he or she is feeling, then a second narrative or a third narrative starts being constructed, the narrative of the listener. Obviously, the mental health professionals are, like us, like writers, in a position of privilege in that they reconstruct these stories to be able to then renew or to be able to support the other person. How much of this, now I'd like to hear, even vis-a-vis risk, Massimo, how much of of this responsibility of telling the other's story. So let's say if you're, in the case of theatre, if you're narrating, I don't know, any story about migration perhaps, or a personal story of pain or something, how much of this responsibility do you feel and do you consciously take on, and how much of it do you actually leave out? So using your privilege to, as it were, protect the person in that state.
Ne abbiamo proprio parlato molto nella presentazione di questa mattina, di questo tema, senza saperlo, proprio perché raccontando la complessità delle storie recenti, contemporanee che affrontano il mio teatro, si è posto il problema della responsabilità.
This is something we discussed this morning in our workshop. We were talking about the complexities of contemporaneity, and we delved into these challenges that the author faces when he or she looks at the complexities of a very an ever-changing world. I think I added a couple of things there. I'm not a translator, so.
E questo elemento è la cosa che tengo in assoluto più presente sempre quando scrivo. La responsabilità e l'impegno per raggiungere una forma della storia che non sia retorica e quindi non offenda la storia.
So these are two things I really keep in mind all the time when I'm writing this kind of narratives. My responsibility as a person towards the story, but also avoiding being rhetorical in the way I tell those stories.
Massimo, I believe we'll be seeing a trailer of a film you've written, and I believe it's grounded in an actual story, no? In a real story. What were the ethical questions there vis-a-vis the person involved, who really exists to this day, who's still alive, and what the narrative is saying, the level of reportage, as it were, and the constructed level, not to say the fictional level.
In realtà io credo che si può essere più fedeli alla storia molte volte tradendola. Cioè,
very often you can be faithful to the story by betraying that story.
molte volte l'espediente narrativo, più che deviare la storia, riesce ad andare al cuore della storia meglio del reportage, del semplice documento.
How?
Narrative has the possibility of going deeper into the story, sometimes more than reportage, more than your documentary.
Ma avrei decine di esempi, faccio uno. Nella storia ambientata durante la rivolta di Reggio Calabria, in cui raccontiamo di 5 ragazzi diciottenni, questi ragazzi vivevano con altre decine di ragazzi.
Okay, so I can give many examples, tens of examples, but I'll give one. One of the stories I wrote was a story called about a revolt in Reggio Calabria, which took place in 1970. The protagonists of the story are 5 young people, 18-year-olds.
Vivevano con altre decine di ragazzi in uno spazio che si chiama la baracca, volgarmente.
They lived with many other young people. Yes, they lived with a group of other young people in a place which they called La Baracca. They were anarchists.
Io ho inventato un personaggio che non esisteva, che rappresentava tutto quel mondo che girava intorno. Si chiamava Saro ed è la testimonianza della relazione loro con quel mondo.
So I literally invented the character, the main character, who's called Bazzaro, who represents in many ways, who somehow brings together the kind of relationship these young people have with the environment in which they live.
Shall we watch the trailer very quickly? Then perhaps we can refer to it.
Il film sta per uscire. Per me è molto importante perché nasce dalla relazione con una persona, ma da un progetto molto più grande, che ha liberato 60 persone dall'ospedale psichiatrico, cioè dal manicomio criminale.
Okay, so this is a film which is being released very soon. This is the trailer. It's basically about one person who is still alive and who Massimo got to know and interviewed at length. And it's the story of one person, but in reality this represents the story of 60 people who were released from a criminal mental institution many years ago, and this in a way sort of represents, the film somehow is a perspective on the reality of these 60 people.
È solo un normale controllo, vedrai.
Oggi è stato il turno di Ezio Rossi, già aderente alle organizzazioni comuniste combattenti, dalle quali si è dissociato 4 anni fa.
I rapporti con il bandito Cavallero e con Valanzesca non sono verificabili, però sono credibili, perché vedi, date, luoghi, coincide tutto.
Me lo ricordo molto bene. È finito in OPG. Speravo che il percorso fatto insieme fosse servito.
Se è il sovraffollamento il problema, perché non facciamo uscire quelle persone che non ci dovrebbero più stare qui?
Ferrari sei un reietto irrecuperabile, buono soltanto ad attentare al vivere civile.
Dottore, ho avuto paura e sono scappato. Una comunità? Una comunità non è la libertà, direttore.
Ho finito, ho pagato 34 anni. 30 anni come carcere, dopodiché la misura di sicurezza è andata in esecuzione e sto scontando i 3 anni della misura di sicurezza di 30 anni fa, dove non si trova manco più la perizia psichiatrica.
Noi siamo fermi ad una visione dell'Ottocento.
We'll come back to this later. I'd like us to touch a bit on our responsibilities and our use of our privilege vis-à-vis accepted practices, our engagement with authority and engagement with institutions, and yet again, how we either perpetuate the narratives that they tell us, or they've been presenting to us for a number of years, and sometimes these narratives last, and the consequences last forever. But we'll take that up a bit later. Juana, can we have your view on credibility, on fragility as a source of credibility? And what I mean by that is that if you present, and this is where I agree with Claire, that happiness and perfection can be a little bit boring, so how do you move as a writer from writing this monodimensional flat characters to a more rounded character, if you like, who's always carrying this possibility of failure, who's always, even in the best of moments, has this looming cloud somewhere, even if it's invisible. How do you approach that?
Well, I think I take this position myself when I'm writing. I'm always confronted with the possibility of failure, and part of that is...
Well, what do you mean by that?
Part of that is to do with my bilingual background and feeling like I'm not really native in either language, Spanish and English. And
so what's the language you spoke from?
Spanish and English, both.
Okay, so you have a real crisis there.
Exactly. And so there's always this kind of potential of absolute impossibility of communicating the essence, and kind of every attempt being just that, just an attempt of reaching the idea that you want to reach. And so I think if you start out from that position, it's quite difficult to arrive to a flat, as you say, kind of character. Well, I don't really write fiction, so it's not the same process, but I think it would be very difficult to write in a preachy way, let's say, with the kind of hegemonic view of reality, because I'm starting out from that position of danger and of impossibility.
Is that impossibility what seduces you to write further, like Claire did? Or
I think so, yeah. I think there is a kind of strange fascination in there, and curiosity.
To explore further. Yeah. But, and then how does that apply to happiness? Isn't the possibility of happiness also a driver in itself, an objective in itself?
Well, as you said...
In life and in writing, of course.
As you said, happiness is kind of a lot more difficult. If you look at it from the point of view of a state of mind, it takes a lot more practice and a lot more effort and kind of directed effort to achieve than suffering. In the way suffering is kind of our default, and it's where we always go. It's kind of the condition of a human mind, and to kind of bend out of that is quite a struggle in itself.
Was it Aristophanes who said to be able to write tragedy well, you have to be able to write good comedy? Was it Aristophanes?
For every comedy there's a tragedy.
Laia, is fragility or vulnerability, if you like, necessary for the credibility? You're a prose writer, no? Obviously.
Poetry and
poetry. Is fragility and vulnerability necessary for the writer's credibility?
I can tell you about a story about long ago, because I don't think exactly that, but it happens to me that I come to a conclusion that you always betray something when you're telling a story, or even when you're writing a poem, because in the poem writing, I usually wait things to come to me, words to come to me, and in the prose writing or the fiction writing, I have the temptation of like imposing my meaning.
How do you mean that? Hold on, how do you mean that?
How do I mean that?
What do you mean by imposing your meaning?
Imposing my meaning to the thing that I want to tell. I mean, there's always a point of view that's upper things that we want to tell in stories, I think. So if I tell you the example, maybe you can see. It was a story about a child who was raped. So I tried to make the effort of surround or go around the way I could tell that story. And all the story is the temptation about telling what cannot be told. So finally, the conclusion is you will never reach the way to tell I don't know, the experience of that violence. So all the story was...
Let's step back, because I'm a bit slow
Yeah.
catching up on this. So, so you're writing in a way about something which we cannot speak about somehow.
I can speak about that, but maybe if I do it, imposing some point of view of my own about that experience that will be real, I was somehow betraying the fact that I was narrating.
Okay, so in a way you're saying you have this responsibility to be truthful rather than, as Massimo was saying, constructing and making it more truthful.
But finally, as you are writing, you are constructing something.
Yes, of course.
Even if going in circles around what you want to tell finally. I mean, that's the example of this story that I finally wrote this way. Like,
okay. And would that be just a stylistic choice, or would it be an ethical choice? In this case, in this specific
in
case.
this case, was an ethical choice.
It was an ethical choice.
First, and then obviously if you're writing, it's an aesthetical choice, final. But to me, they are linked. They are related. Okay. They are not separated.
Which reminds me about the violence that Jean has mentioned. In acknowledging fragility as a human condition, as it were, in that act in itself, in acknowledging the fragility, one is also violating these moral constructs about, you know, the perfect human being who at some point might fall, and one violates concepts of perhaps the building of the construction of an ideal society. John, how do you approach these complex ethical situations, and would you plunge yourself into, let's say, a violent position consciously, or would you try to avoid it, or would you look for deviance or some kind of that level of the corrupt dimension of the human being, as it were? Corrupt is obviously a more loaded word. How do you approach violence? How do you approach complex ethical issues like these? Of course, in the back of my question, there's also the whole discussion about violence as being instrumental to change in some cases. So, especially when it comes to, for example, some institutions and some authority, some levels of authority.
Okay.
So it's not just about personal stories, which Laia was mentioning. It's also about the institution and the public.
French poet tried to change world one time. Rimbaud tried to change world. But after his adolescence crisis, teenager crisis, he became marchand trader, and he sailed weapon near from Aden. So, by the way, I think there is a responsibility. We have a responsibility. We have not to try to change the world. There is something there is something Japanese author whose name is Issa, Kobayashi Issa, and he said, we are in the roof, we are walking on the roof of the hell, gazing to the floor. In the fact, I don't try to express something. I let something express I just sort of medium, you understand? And I try to, as it's concerning something between the now, the night outside, the suffering in the world outside, and something inside me, the night inside me. And I try to accueillir, receive, welcome, something of this unknown, to transmit it, and to keep it in its fragility. What is difficult, and what I try when I write like this, you see, I can write for hours, and that is bullshit, just for trash can. And at one moment, something, I awake in the morning, and the world became to me. And I start to writing, and I don't know what I'm writing. I try to welcome the unknown. And the work after that is to keep it in its fragility. For people who read can welcome their own unknown.
Hold on, what do you mean by that? To keep it in a state of fragility, which means you don't edit it, you leave the first draft, and you publish the first draft. Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay, so what do you mean?
Yes, I rewrite a lot my text, for they can flow like a river. For, you see, this thing very fragile, for, I will not be violent, you see? I think there is
Can you not be violent? I mean, in the act of writing itself, there's a transgression of the status quo.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's the trouble you mentioned in the beginning.
J'essaie d'accueillir la violence de l'étrangeté. C'est qu'il peut y avoir de violent et d'inconfortable dans l'étrangeté et dans l'inconnu. C'est peut-être ça, et de permettre dans un texte que l'autre puisse avoir moins besoin de se protéger, avoir moins peur de son propre inconnu à lui.
So I try to welcome the fragility that comes from whatever is strange or foreign, and in that way, and then render it to my reader, so that the reader himself or herself then welcomes his or her own fragility.
Any of the other panelists feel the same way? I mean, it's quite an instrumental view of what the writer is, what the writer's role is. It's like a bit like waiting for divine inspiration to flow through the writer.
I don't agree with this. I think I work very hard on my characters to make them believable.
Is it something you don't agree, or is it just not your...
No, I don't think words just come, from some...
So Claire is saying words don't just come.
Yeah.
But then again, I write fiction and the poetry, and I have no idea how poetry comes.
Poetry is a total lie.
It's just like it's occurred to me, you see. It's not the world with little legs will come. I know the world are inside me, and it's just like a condensation, you see, the cloud more and more, and at a moment it's rain, you see, and it's the way I can welcome this moment or something strange occurs and let him grow until I write.
Laia, how do you approach this? Sorry.
Probably I'm more of a practical person, and since I'm writing characters and believable characters, I think first of all I'm always fully aware and conscious of what I'm writing, and also the one thing that I don't want is to victimize my characters and create some kind of pornography of pity. So and to do that, you have to be fully aware of what you are writing. I'm speaking about fiction. And on a very practical side, I literally entrap my characters into boxes and give them the traits and break them up literally.
Of course, I don't suppose you're meaning boxes, monodimensional sort of characters.
Yeah.
I mean,
yes, in spaces, in boxes could be anything, you know, in their daily routines, in their confined spaces. Yes, and then, yeah, well, visually would be, yeah, they would really, literally be boxes.
Juana, what's your, or Laia, what's your process like vis-a-vis, do you wait for words? What you just sit down and write?
First of all, I have to say I don't believe in inspiration. I think I don't
Sorry,
believe
Jean, to be fair with you,
in
when you speak
poetry.
about inspiration, No, okay.
It's a process. It's something who happens, but if I try to write, I say, okay, I see it and I write something. It's not good. But when, sometimes when I awake, there is word in my head, and if I let them grow, it could become a poem. Okay? Just something like you see when you literally a process like a dream but awake. You understand? It's not inspiration. From who?
Because you're quite a tall guy, so you're quite I don't might be there.
No.
To me, it has to be with a sense of musicality of the words. So if I wait for some word to come, it means for the music of the words that will come to me in some way in poetry. And in another side, I I don't remember what I was going to say.
Would you like to read the stuff you prepared for us?
Yes.
For lack of words.
Of course.
Can you contextualize what you're reading?
Yeah.
And do you have a translation of it? Or?
It's a poem that's called Imagen del Animal, which is image of the animal. It's about illness, it's about suffering, and it's about I don't know, I always look at the animals and see their reactions and how they treat them each other, and I think it can be an instrument to heal us, to heal our own pain, you know? And it was written in a moment of I think mental pain, mental suffering, and it's about healing, about this image of the inner animal, I would say, that creates a connection with a non-human dimension that can be some kind of help.
Let's hear it.
Imagino al animal. Me acoge desde el reino de enfermedad memoria. Retiene lo mudo en su cuerpo, lo contrae y lo abraza como a un huésped indistinto. Imagino al animal. Es un pueblo sumergido bajo el agua. Es alveolo, es nervio, es mella, no es espíritu. Imagino al animal. Me abandona y me nutre. Me rodea mis pies y los muerde con fuerza. Es la sangre que corre por mis pies mordidos, el suelo que los soporta, la venda que los cura. Mi estéril, mi contacto, mi frágil basamento. Imagino al animal.
Xbija tal-annimal. Immaġina l-annimal jilqani fil-renju tal-mart memorja. Iżomm is-silenzju f'ġismu, jagħmlu u jafsu daqs li kieku mistiedem ma jintarafx. Immaġina l-annimal, daħal merreq taħt l-ilma. Huwa ċellola f'ġisem, nerv, asma, le, spiritu mhux. Immaġina l-annimal, jiklaqnu fl-istess ħin jitman. Jimxu ma' saqajja u jikdimhom kemm ituħ in-nejbiet. Idem qed iċarċar minn saqajja mikduma, laqgħet qed iżommhom, faxxa qed iddewwihom, il-pedament, sterili, żgħira, fir-raġli tiegħi. Immaġina l-annimal.
It's interesting in this respect. It's interesting in this respect how very often when we and I've seen this before, when there is a situation where which seems bigger than us or which seems a bit too daunting, especially in mental health crises, for example, or in terminal illness, we objectify that fear and place it on another being, in this case an animal, of course. Some abstract it to animals, some abstract it to some kind of generic war, the war on cancer, that sort of BS. Juana, what did you prepare for us?
Well, it's really interesting that you're talking about objectifying the fear as an animal, because that's exactly what my piece is about.
In objectifying these fears, we're obviously dehumanizing ourselves. Huh? It's not. It's refuting that part of our fragility, which is worrying.
I don't know, because well, in the case of what I prepared, it's something I wrote while I was away on.
Juana, stop making these sounds, please. It's for effect.
So I was doing a writing retreat in Italy, and there were supposed to be 4 other artists with me at the same time, but they all cancelled. So I found myself unexpectedly.
So you had to eat and drink before you.
Yes, I had to do that. And I had to sit with myself for a month, confronting my own inner dialogue and madness and fear and everything else. And it was a really interesting experience. I'd never spent that much time alone. I wasn't sure if I could do it. I survived. But on one of the days, I was sitting outside on the balcony, and I kind of noticed some object which I thought was a rope, and I was just looking at it, and then it suddenly moved, and it was a snake, and I was so scared. I kind of ran and screamed, and then I realized I was alone, and nobody could help me kill the snake. And what am I going to do? But then, as I jumped up and ran away, I noticed that the snake also was quite startled and slipped away. And so this was the starting point for a very long piece that I wrote called The Serpent Dialogues, in which I'm kind of creating this female character who's having a conversation with the snake, who would represent fear and this kind of state of danger and anxiety. And so the way I wrote it, it has kind of 4 different voices. One is a narrative element, then there's 2 voices speaking to each other, the woman and the snake. And then all of this is interrupted by footnotes, and the footnotes are written in verse form. So it's kind of constantly questioning and constantly interrupting the text itself, and there's nothing stable, and it's kind of quite... nothing is certain in it, and that's kind of the whole point. And so I brought it, but I apologize, I'm going to be reading from my phone. And
that's terrible.
It's not reading. I need to save the trees, you know. Okay, and I'm actually going to stand up because the way these things are arranged on the page, it kind of needs some movement. So I'll try my best. Anyway. So when the woman realized the snake was scared of her too. She went back to the balcony, where she'd at first mistaken him for a spool of brightly colored rope. She lay down on the ground and waited, watching fear take hold of her body. Pools of sickness through her limbs, sweat like black ice, her breath sprinting ahead, and her unable to catch up. Footnote. Who were you? Why were you given my name, since the mountains rose up in revolt? Why was I given yours, with a mouth tinged in fire? She kept wanting to flee. Her ears full of fabricated rattle hiss. But then she remembered the way the snake had flashed out of sight, back into encroaching wilderness, as soon as she'd taken a step too close. The thought of the snake being afraid somehow helped her stay put till lunch. He did not come back that day, but she decided to repeat the ritual every morning at the same hour, to give him time, to let the snake make all of the decisions, even if he needed 1,000 years. She lay always on the same side, still as a mountain, her hip pointy as a snowy peak. Footnote. Look at this old postcard from Tibet. Mountains were taught as a picture of stillness, but the chaos that went into making that shape is still pushing up, up. The snake watched sideways from a safe distance and slinked a little closer each day, trying to work out if she was a threat. A long time passed before she was able to unclench her jaw and ask some questions. The snake, to her surprise, had answers. Snake, what do you think of monotheism, since everything is holy? Woman, you know, humans need to organize everything. Messages need to be packaged intelligibly, otherwise they can be lost. So, is that why Mass is didactic in structure? Like a theatre play, is what you're saying? Yes, but the sacred element is also built through repetition. Repetition is much loved by humans. Snake, you don't dislike it either, since you come here to see me every day. Woman, it's nice on this rock. It just continues.
Claire, shall we see what you prepared for us? Can you contextualize a bit?
This is not about animals.
Not about animals.
So I will be reading a short piece from this book, and this will be in Maltese. At least we will hear a little bit of Maltese for this evening. But the context I wrote in English. So this character is Polly, and Polly is a broken character. She has been through a lot. She's lonely and poor and physically disabled and in pain. She's not privileged enough to be gently broken. She has no one, and nobody cares about her. She's everywhere and nowhere. She pops in and out of each and every story in this book. Other characters from other stories see her rummaging in the bins, collecting bottles for a few cents, cooking to herself. They don't understand what she says, because her words are stolen. They don't make sense. Polly suffers on her own. She's the character who's trying to inhabit the space on these few pages of this book. If I, the writer, don't talk about her, she will remain unnoticeable. And with the story, I try to share with the reader Polly's suffering. Otherwise, it will be forgotten. And I think that the fragile, or the other, deserves a witness or an accomplice. So now, if you allow me, I will read a few paragraphs from Police Story in Maltese. And for those of you who don't understand, well, you get a little bit of the context. And you also understand suffering. Kella 63 kulpa kollox. Kienet toqgħod tirrakkontalhom l-istejer kull filgħaxija qabel ħallu l-lejl jħoddilhom kulurhom. Għax tkun ilek istin tgħix waħdek mingħajr ma tgħid kelma, tibda tinsa saħansitra l-vuċi tiegħek. U Holly ma rriditx tinsa dik il-vuċi fiqha u wersa. Il-pubbi kienu jisimgħuha bla jinsnifsu bħal-ilma jgħid. U dan kien ftehim li kienet komda bih. Ma kienx bżonn tweġibiet jew opinjonijiet. Kien il-kliem kollu. Il-qiegħed kif jogħġob lilha. Kull pupa kienet orfni u kienet kera. Polly kienet sabithom kollha barra u ġobrithom għax hekk kienet tagħmel tiġbor dak li jiġi idea. Qatt ma kien pjan iddettaljat u maħdud sewwa dan tal-pup minferxa fil-kamra tal-Glen. Imma ma' żmien il-pjan beda jifforma u ċifra kienet ittimbrata sew fuqha. 36. Laħqitha wara ħafna snin. Ma kienx hemm marġni. Hekk jew bekk kella kien kollu tal-ġurnata ta' il-funerali li kienet tmurhom kollha. Biex raret li kienet tiġbor kienet tħittilhom libsa, kollha kemm huma kellhom waħda. Ħafna minnhom kienet identika mill-istess pizza drab oħrajn kienet tidher imlaqta sewwa bħalma kien imlaqat xarhom. U dawna. Ma kellhomx isem daw il-puplu, ma kellhomx il-bissiema. Kienu kollha skjerati fuq xkafef differenti fuq is-sifan, fuq il-kredenza fuq television li refugi fuq il-barra tattija, kienu qishom se jinfaqgħu jibqgħu qatt ma jgħazzardaw. Lanqas Polly, qatt ma żardat. Għax hemm min tibki. X'kien se jinbidel? Xejn affattu. Li f'dakinhar naturalment, dakinhar tal-funeral meta l-folla jtibdu kollha f'daqqa, meta t-tirrub tgħadda minn idejha u mxiet wara ħseb knisja u kienet għodda mis-sittu bida. Kienet twetnisom lill-pupli, jisom it-tfal. It-tfal tagħha. Min minnhom kellu xaru, min minnhom kellu xar kienet turgost ipernaħulu u min kellu l-għajnejn kienet turgost iċċaqla għandu biex tarhom jinfettu jingħalem. Imbagħad dawk li ma kellhomx kienu li tirhom buttuna jew tnejn ħafna drabi differenti. Ma l-perfezzjoni ma kellix sili, la ma kienux jaraw.
Jean, perhaps?
Jean, can you contextualize a bit about the background?
À un moment dans mes poèmes, c'est installé, et c'est quelque chose qui est toujours là. Je ne sais pas pourquoi, il y a des poèmes qui s'écrivent avec un L. L, et c'est quelque chose qui se passe avec un L. Et à un moment, commençait à s'installer un dialogue entre lui et un L dans mes poèmes. C'était toute une série de poèmes. Et ce que je vais lire, c'est un de ceux-là. Dans cette série-là qui s'appelle la tardigrade. Le tardigrade, c'est au masculin, normalement. Tardigrade, no, it's little extremophile, a little insect, very, very little insect who can resist to extreme cold, extreme hot, who in the NASA take them in the space and expose them to the emptiness and the radiation, cosmic radiation, and they are still alive after. They reconstruct the ADN, acid, pressure, very, very, very little, and his name is tardigrade.
So he said there was a whole period when he was writing, there would always be a she in his writing. He doesn't know why, but there was always a she. But then at one point he introduced the he, so that there would be a kind of dialogue between the he and the she. And there's a whole series of texts that were written in this fashion. And so this is one of these texts. And the name of the series is the name of this insect that he's talking about that is resistant to both extreme heat and extreme cold, and that is actually taken into space by NASA.
Ce n'est pas une vague, c'est une phrase. Tu la reprends tous les jours entre les virgules du sommeil. Tu marches à pied dans cette forêt où les arbres s'assoient au passage des oiseaux, où les tentes ne se distinguent plus des maisons, où les chemins se croisent perpendiculairement. Est-ce qu'on a le droit de dire perpendiculairement asymptotique? Et est-ce qu'un poème peut mourir? Un arbre pousse à l'envers d'un bière. J'ai peur qu'un poisson tombe sur la table du bistrot. Devant moi, il n'y a personne, et d'ailleurs il n'y a pas de verre. Je peux voir à travers toi. Tu n'es rien qui existe, rien qui n'existe pas. Les oiseaux de feu n'existent pas, et les salamandres ne vivent pas dans le goudron, tu le sais. Pas plus que tu ne vis dans les mots. La rivière déborde la rivière qui a ton visage. Ce ne sont pas des larmes ni une marée, à peine une flaque, où se noie le reflet des étoiles. Peut-être n'ai-je pas lancé l'encre assez haut pour empêcher la terre de tourner. Peut-être, quand je suis sorti faire les courses, n'ai-je pas mis les bonnes chaussures. Sur le fil de la montagne, sur le seuil de la maison, une feuille tremble qui n'est jamais tombée d'un arbre.
It's not a wave, it's a sentence. You come back to it every day between the commas of sleep. You walk in the forest where the trees sit and salute the passing birds, where tents are no different from houses, where paths cross at right angles. Is it right to say perpendicularly asymptotic? And is it possible that a poem could die? A tree grows upside down in my beard. I'm frightened that a fish will fall and be struck to it. There is no one opposite me, and I have no glass. I can see right through you. You are nothing that exists, and you are nothing that does not exist. Firebirds do not exist, and salamanders do not live in tar. You know that. You don't live in words either. A river overflows into the river, bears your face. Is not tears or the tide, barely a puddle that can drown the reflection of the stars. Perhaps I didn't throw the anchor high enough to stop the earth spinning. Perhaps when I went out shopping, I put the wrong shoes on. On the edge of the mountain, on the threshold of the house, a leaf that has not fallen from the tree, trembles.
So, at this stage, thank you, Jean. Just like to give one round of applause for the panelists. So thank you all for presenting. So thank you all for presenting, sharing your work, sharing your views. I've soon reached my curfew, so if you can have your observations very, very quickly, or questions or comments. Anyone wants to ask the panelists something, or don't ask me. Any observations, questions? John. Shall we give them the...
So thank you all for your presentations, and thank you for your provocative comments. I have two remarks about your interpretation of fragility as vulnerability and as a break out of habit. For me, the two go hand in hand in some sense. And my first comment is that I think from a literary point of view, fragility is the norm. However, unfortunately, in a modernist society, very much influenced by a narrow perspective of psychology. Fragility and vulnerability are seen as a form of madness. Right? This is unfortunate because psychology has mythologized the norm at the exclusion of fragility and vulnerability, which I think are at the core of literature itself. Why? Because fragility and vulnerability, in my view, are an intrinsic human condition. And if you remove that, then I think you have killed literature. That's my first remark. The second remark is about your pushing Clare and some of the others about happiness. I think dealing with fragility and dealing with vulnerability and being able in a literary form to express that fragility and vulnerability, I think is a form of happiness in itself, which of course is not unconnected with the notion of catharsis, which of course then leads to the whole issue possibly of mental health. Okay, thank you.
Very quick replies. Yes. I think psychologists stopped normalizing, stopped mythologizing normality or normalcy in the 50s and 60s, with even in practice with Deleuze and then later Guattari, and that's where the interesting narrative-based medicine in psychiatry and psychology started developing till today. I think we're in agreement about indulging in suffering as a form of pleasure, of course, and that's why I use the word indulgence with Clare. Of course. She enjoys
I'm not
it.
sure
That's why I thought it was
it's
masochistic.
accounting for the suffering is what creates the happiness. There is a difference, I think.
Yes, in that respect, yes. If you put it that way, yes, of course. And I would agree with that. But please ask the panelists.
Yes.
I'm done.
Me too.
Over that.
Yeah.
More observations, questions, provocations?
Okay, I can say something small.
Sure.
So, okay. I think, I don't know if this is working.
It is.
This is, okay. When one works through one's fragility, it's a choice to reveal that which is natural to hide and protect in you. So if I say, for example, I work through my fear of loss, I work through my fear of rejection, that is creating a point of authenticity. And it is through that authenticity that you get resonance. So, even my work, because I work in hospital, I work through this awareness and this presence and this point of contact. The viewer, who is the patient, who is going through their own journey of coming to grips with their own suffering, with their own fears, with their own losses, with their own crises, with their depression, with their anxiety, with their stress, with whatever. So that is a point of contact. And that allows the...
Between you and...
Yes, it could be through a work of art, for example, or through a workshop, for example. And once you achieve that point of contact, then there is that connection. And when you have a connection, that leads to a sharing and a being together, a being there for each other. And that is where there is a sort of a holding taking place.
Holding?
A holding, yes. Holding doesn't have to be a physical holding, but it's a sense of containment. And in hospital, for example, that is very important, to give a sense of containment. So through being vulnerable, through choosing to be vulnerable, you can create a sense of containment, of presence for the person who's going, for example, through cancer, through their own in his journey.
From a writer's perspective, do you relate to this, or did you look for it? Do you look for this point of contact or compassion?
Well, for me, it's kind of the whole point of literature is why I read, and I would hope that I would be able to create that in my writing, absolutely. Yeah, I really like how you phrased it, the place of kind of holding and containment. It's kind of like this embrace where you kind of can understand what the other person is suffering, and the way that they have expressed it resonates with your own. Yeah, I think that's a really powerful way of putting it.
My last question to you all was, can we change the world? And as writers, do we have to change the world?
Can we change the world?
And more observations or questions?
One last thing that I'd like to maybe ask each and every one of you. From my experience as a reader, I think much of literature is defined by extremes. As in, because we don't have these extremes or these kind of crises, there is no scope for literature because everything is like static, it's flat, it's a continuum. So we don't need that. In literature, we need the problem, the kind of rising action, to use Freytag's analogy. But do you think that mental health as a topic, which a few years ago has been a great taboo, and nowadays we speak more freely about this topic, do you think that it could be a vehicle through which we can explore a different realm of problems, perhaps? Obviously, we have the psychological implications of a mental illness, but this concept of instability, it kind of resonates a lot with both deconstructivist philosophy, also as socially deconstructivist, and also psychologically deconstructive. So this concept of like the split between perhaps the characters in a story, or the character between himself in a story, do you think we can amplify this even further with, or perhaps without, the actual reference to mental illness? As in, can we use this further? Can we take mental health to a new level by emphasizing this concept, maybe even of identity?
Hold on, I'm not sure I'm following. So you're saying, do we refer to mental health or not refer to mental health, or refer to it indirectly?
Yes. I mean, do you use this concept of mental health? Can we use it as a vehicle to discover ourselves more, perhaps?
So it's like saying, can we use narratives of mental health to explore other narratives?
Yes.
That's what you're
Yes. And we use it as a kind of vehicle to explore
a wider range
of things.
Yes, well, precisely. I've been reading this Korean-German philosopher called Han, and he talks precisely of this, of how mental illness can be seen as an expression of social injustice, for example, and how like the most marginalized societies are the ones who suffer the most, and if we like maybe place a focus on the kind of wider aspect instead of the kind of individual struggle, let's say, we might find something more. I don't know.
Massimo, we haven't paid you. We're not paying you this evening. We haven't paid you enough.
In realtà io non credo nella separazione tra il malato mentale, anche per esperienza. Nel senso che ho fatto molte esperienze di lavoro, di training teatrale con comunità di cosiddetti malati mentali.
So in reality, even from my own personal experience, I don't see a clear distinction or division between separation between people who are so-called mentally ill and so-called normal people.
Non c'è stata una volta in cui io, la prima volta che arrivavo in questi luoghi, abbia riconosciuto gli operatori del... sempre, ho individuato alcuni operatori come malati, alcuni malati come...
Whenever I've been in situations where I didn't know the people I was meeting and I didn't know who was so-called ill and who was mentally ill and who was so-called normal, I always had problems identifying the normal as ill and the ill as normal.
Quindi assolutamente non credo in questa separazione, è l'istituzione che crea l'identità del malato. E il potere in qualche modo che lo fa, e perché a un certo punto credo che la cultura moderna abbia rinunciato a un approccio umano alla salute mentale.
Essentially, I believe that it's the institution that creates the identity of the mentally ill person. And that is the second bit. Cos'era la seconda cosa
che quindi le istituzioni moderne hanno rinunciato a un approccio umano.
And institutions have, modern institutions have renounced a more human approach, a more humane approach.
Quindi sì, la salute mentale è uno specchio, perché non può che essere, e in realtà dal mio punto di vista molto spesso trovo linguaggi del corpo in persone che possono avere problematiche di salute mentale molto più interessanti rispetto a un cosiddetto normale. E spesso li pongo come esempi agli attori, perché hanno una verità del corpo che molto spesso noi non abbiamo.
So, I see mental health as a mirror of humanity, and the language, I find the languages of the body as much more interesting in so-called mentally ill persons than in other persons, and this is in the world of theatre in which Massimo works a lot. He presents this language of the body of the mentally ill person as a truth, as a true behavior of the body that he thinks that the actors should somehow be inspired by.